are the change makers. And you are the movers and shakers. Are you awake and ready? Yes. Sakhi ki agya mere liye aadesh. When all the laughter dies in sorrow, when all the tears have risen to a flood, when all the wars have found a cause in human wisdom and in blood, do you think they will cry in sadness? Do you think the eye will blink? Do you think they will curse the madness? Do you even think they will think? When all the great galactic systems have sighed to a frozen hope in space, do you think there will be remnants of beauty in the human race? Do you think there will be a vestige of a sniffle or a cosmic tear? Do you even think that a greater thinking thing will give a damn that man was here? So when I think about education, I think about these two very prominent words, education for peace and environment, because both of them are very integral to what learning should be today in classrooms, because it takes us from isolation to alliance. It takes us from self-centered existence to coexistence. It takes us from alienation to collaboration. And it takes us from being separate from everybody else to bring together. When I think about myself, I say I'm a child of war. My father received the Mahavir Chakra in the 1971 Bangladesh War. He was a captain of a ship, and his task was to hunt for mines and enemy submarines in the water. And the naval fleet then proceeded. His ship was torpedoed on the 9th December 1971. He had precisely 3.5 minutes before the battleship went down. That was the first time in naval history that a battleship went down so fast. But in those 3.5 minutes, he saved the lives of innumerable sailors and officers. He took his life jacket and gave it to a sailor and said, "Don't worry about me, save yourself." And he realized that there were very young boys on board ship who were scared of the burning waters and the ammunition that was exploding all around them. And he realized there was a whole group of people who were trapped below deck, and he couldn't leave them. So he turned around and he went back to the captain's chair and he sat down and he went down with the ship. That taught me several things, his actions. First was courage. Second was a meditative calm, which was not built overnight because there are no penny in the slot heroes. They're built in the schoolrooms. And the third was presence of mind. And what is presence of mind? Presence of mind is the ability to take action once you are aware of what is happening around you, and then you think of the other. He could have taken an easy step, but he didn't. And what is it that made me think to become a teacher? I thought that if wars are made in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men we have to find peace. And what greater place than in the school? And the second is that you don't leave anybody behind. You don't leave children behind. And that's what made me a teacher. I've always lived in education, physically, spiritually, emotionally. I never got out of school. I'm a 68-year-old woman, I'm still in school. In spite of the fact that very often schools threw me out. I was anxious about education when I was in it, and I was anxious about education when I was thrown out of it. And I wondered, why was I thrown out of it? I thought I was being innovative. They thought I was indisciplined. And all I did was perhaps make a couple of apple pie beds for the nuns, which was a bit drastic because when you put your foot in, then the sheets tear, and it's pretty bad on a cold weather. And I nicked a couple of peanut butter sandwiches from their refectory. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I was chucked out, but if truth be told, the same nuns came back and said to me after the war, "Please come back." And they made me a school leader. I don't know whether they did that because they were afraid of me, or they wanted me out of the way. But that's when the transformation of my life started. as a student and as a school leader. When I look at 21st century, I think of Linus Pauling. And Linus Pauling was a Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Prize both in peace and in chemistry. And he said that the 21st century should be a century of happiness and health. But I don't see it. It's nowhere. I don't see it at all. And so amidst all this uncertainty, amidst this Barney world, Barney now has replaced VUCA. I don't know if you know that. And it's brittle, and it's anxious, and it's non-linear, and it's completely incomprehensible. And so in this Barney world, how do we find the passion and the potential of children? How do we find it? How do we prepare them for the future? What are the kind of sustainable futures that we want in education? And how do we bring the seeds of interconnectedness, interdependence and awareness in the lives of our children? How do we do that? And it takes me all the way back to the Rig Veda. When I think 2,500 years ago it was said that Udara Charitam Vikaratu Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Enlarge your character to such an extent that it embraces the world, because the world is a family. And interestingly, the Prophet Hazrat Ali said the same thing in 599 when he said there's no greater power than empathy. There's no greater learning than consultation. And Ubuntu says people are people because of other people. And so the whole interdependence of life is what we need to learn in the classrooms. And everybody bleats about Sustainable Development Goal 4, inclusion, equity, lifelong learning. What happened to all the 17 goals? All of them are integral to learning, whether it is gender sensitivity, or say no to hunger, or poverty, or climate action, or partnership. They have to be integrated into the very systems, into the very soul and spirit of learning in every classroom. And I think that's what is so essential. But all that we see today is a very strange mix of, life is being lived in abbreviations. NEET, JEE, CUET, quota, coaching. I mean, is life an abbreviation or is it an extended essay? Is it a sprint or is it a marathon? So if we have to look at the way education is being transacted, we must first look at the fact that in order to ensure learning, what is happening to human flourishing? How do we bridge the gap between the spirituality, the physicality, the emotions of learning? Essentially, to bring into classroom the togetherness of self, of self with the planet, of self with the other. Essentially, all your books teach that, but we don't draw that. We just draw formulas. And so when I think of the butterfly effect of Edward Lorenz, I wonder about interdependence. How do you teach that? How do you teach interdependence in your classrooms? If you're teaching physics, and it's about heat, light, and electricity, and every time you leave that bulb on, do you think of that farmer, that coal miner in Dhanbad, who's going down that coal shaft? His lungs are filled with carbon. He will be dead by the age of 30, and the coal barons will not care about his widow and the children. Are we not indirectly the cause of his death? The interdependence of life. Every time we wear these jeans with so much of pride, and we pay dollars, thousands of dollars for it, if it's a Gucci or a Versace or any other chi that we're looking at, because brand is God. Do we think of that one woman sitting in a hut in Bangladesh, earning 38 takas, her hands are dyed with indigo, and she just gets nothing, but we're wearing those jeans? Are we responsible indirectly for her poverty because all we see is the product, not the creator of that product? Every time we waste something on our plates, we are a fast food generation. Do we think of that farmer who's standing in 3 feet of water in Terai with leeches on his feet, and who will perhaps commit suicide because the distribution systems of our country aren't so hot? Are we not then responsible in certain ways for what's going to happen to all these three people, and perhaps more. What I'm going to say is that if we are young people, or even if we are adults, we must be creators if we are consumers. But somewhere we've lost the plot, because we continuously consume as a generation, but we don't create. Whether it was Einstein, or whether it was Madame Curie, or whether it was M.F. Hussain, or whether it was any other scientist or great discoverer, they consumed, no doubt, but they created. It's important to think, what do I create? Because I'm constantly in a rush of consuming. And so it's imperative that creators should ensure that if they consume, that's what they must give out to society. And how do you sort of transform yourself into becoming a creator? By developing your imagination and your creativity. Imagination and creativity help because they sort of generate compassion and empathy. And compassion and empathy, my dears, is the toothpaste for the brain. How often do you brush your teeth? Once in a year? Once in a month? Once in a day? Nobody seems to answer. I gather you brush your teeth. But how often do you brush your brains? You must brush your brains. And how do you brush your brains? You brush your brains by creating circuits of compassion through reflection, through meditative practices, through activities that move you from the whole cycle of consumption to creation. So take on brain brushing as an exercise. If you brush your teeth twice in a day, brush your brains at least once in a day. I remember hearing Dan Siegel say that in a conference I attended in Vancouver on education for the head, the hand, and the heart. Brain brushing is an exercise that should be practiced in every classroom. And so, how do we brush this? How do we move from this boring 3 hours of arithmetic, writing, and reading to the most important 3 hours of this century? We've already done quarter of a century. And that those 3 hours are relationships, resilience, and reflection. I think it's imperative that all our systems, our learning systems, must bring in these new 3 hours of learning, and that's what should be the mantra of learning today. We do this if we understand that we need to correlate with certain literacies. Digital literacy, which is highly contested and yet at the same time highly abundant. And the fact that data is something we have to deal with, because data is the future, whether it's the educator or the student. But how do we deal with this digital literacy? When we talk about ecological literacy, the belief, the misbelief that we can keep ripping out our planet, but there will be no big deal happening to it. The Lorenz effect. Of course there will be. Global literacy, that we must respect diverse foods and religions, and colors and creeds and castes. And we must be an integral part because the world is a family, the global literacy. And of course, we talk about cultural literacy, the traditions, the cultures of people, the languages of people, the color and the fabric and the texture of people. Because we ultimately come from that one great humanity, which is collective. And emotional literacy, which right now is really been sort of kidnapped, because there's so much issues of well-being, so many issues of not being able to navigate our emotions, the restlessness, the suicides, the worry, the tension, the absolute huge competition that we see around us. These literacies are something that we need to connect with. And of course, today we're living in algorithms. In fact, the AR, the VR, the whatever R's, the sort of machine learning, the coding, they are the low-hanging fruits of the brave new world. And yet we live in algorithms. Netflix tells you what to watch. Google tells you where to go. Shadi.com tells you who to marry. Tinder tells you who to date. Naukri.com tells you which job. I mean, we just left our brain somewhere. And if this is what we're going to do, if we're going to become an algorithm, it worries me, because I think of Keanu Reeves in the picture Matrix, if some of you have seen that. It's as though we're living in a simulated reality, which makes no sense, really. And so if for the next 30 years we have to ensure, by 2030, I beg your pardon, we have to ensure that children have to find a balance between humanity and technology, it is important that we jump out of this. And how do we do it? Because we have to look at the fact that a sort of a Gandhian approach of the head, the hand, and the spirit. And the head is the mindset. And the hand is the skill set. And the spirit is the heart set. We have to unlock that heart set. We have to unlock that compass of the heart set. Because learning is emotional. A child learns the best when he's active, when he loves the teacher. He may love the subject, but if the teacher is awful, the subject goes down the tube. And so, a child is at its best when he is or she is active, productive, receptive. Because then learning does not become an external imposition, it becomes an internal feeling. And that's why it's imperative that every teacher is able to balance the activity with the ability. And then you get into a state of flow. What Csikszentmihalyi talked about flow, an Austrian psychologist. And if you're in a flow, you can do such wonderful things. And when I think of this flow, I think we can find geniuses if we get into the flow, because time passes and we don't really know. And I want to end now by saying that once, years ago, I was taking a group of students across the Zanskar ranges. I was accompanied by a doctor and a lama, and I was accompanied by, I think, an army officer. And as we were moving, we saw a chorten, and the chorten, the prayer flags were flying. And the lama said, "What do you see?" And some of us said, "We see the flag." And somebody said, "We see the wind moving." And then he said, "No, the mind is moving." As far as I'm concerned, education is about the flag, the wind, and the mind moving in a classroom. And that is an idea worth spreading. Thank you.